Hey, welcome back to Spellbound. I'm BJ the Book Witch, and you're watching an episode of Book Both Ways, Reading Like a Writer. So this episode is on enchanted places, in other words, setting, where the story takes place. Often the settings in the stories that we write can seem like a backdrop. Our characters interact with the setting insofar as they're on the run, ducking through the back alleys and the grimy streets of Red London, or trudging through the snow 1 foot at a time during an icy blizzard through the northern mountains. The backdrop can interact and can affect the characters in this way, absolutely. But think about your favorite books and your favorite stories. Are the settings in those stories just a backdrop, or do they feel more immersive and more alive? Sometimes we'll say that the setting has even become a character itself. And that's what I want to talk about today. There are all kinds of lists and strategies, 5 key ways for turning your setting into a character. But that's not what this video is about. I'm not here to talk about writing strategies. By all means, go take a masterclass. In fact, I highly recommend Neil Gaiman's storytelling masterclass. No, this is BookTube, so I want to talk about books, but I want to talk about them as a writer. So I've pulled together a list of a few books that I think really capture this concept of setting as character. And I want to talk about them because they're not at all alike, not in nature or tone or the way that the setting affects the plot. So these are just different ways to look at the concept of setting as character. So let's get started. The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. This is one of my favorite books. So Shirley Jackson writes what I call suburban Gothic, and she really paints a picture of what it was like for housebound women in the 50s and 60s with this sinister and Gothic edge to it. The Haunting of Hill House is also a show on Netflix, and it's very good. 2 seasons, highly recommend, but it's not at all like the book, so definitely check out the show, but also read the book too, because they are very different stories. Anyway, in The Haunting of Hill House, the shy woman Eleanor is invited to stay at Hill House along with a couple of other people who have had paranormal event experience in their past. While there, they're all haunted, but Eleanor seems to be targeted specifically, and she sort of spirals into madness. Great book. So the setting. Hill House itself. The very first paragraph of the book introduces Hill House. Hill House, not sane, stood by itself against its hills, holding darkness within. It had stood so for 80 years and might stand for 80 more. Within, walls continued upright, bricks met neatly, floors were firm, and doors were sensibly shut. Silence lay steadily against the wood and stone of Hill House, and whatever walked there, walked alone. Now honestly, I could talk for a whole half hour about that paragraph alone, about its uses of the H, W, and S sounds already imitating the whispered breezes and silent tones used to describe Hill House itself. And in fact, I have before. I wrote an entire paper on this paragraph alone in grad school. But the reason I chose this to start us off on our setting chat is to talk about setting as sentient. Sentient means a thing that feels or has feelings. And making inanimate objects sentient is a common trope in horror, especially Gothic horror. So throughout the book, it's not ghosts or the paranormal or some creepy murdered Victorian child that haunts the group and Eleanor. It is the house itself. And Jackson tells us this up front. The very second sentence of this entire book, the first sentence from the paragraph that I read you, tells us that this house is sentient. It says, Hill House, not sane, stood by itself. You wouldn't describe a chair as sane or a spoon as insane. So to refer to a house, this house as not sane, tells us that it thinks, it feels, it is alive, and it is not sane. So by making Hill House sentient, Jackson has transformed the setting of her book into a character. The Hazelwood by Melissa Albert. Now, let's go in a different direction. This book is about a girl named Alice who is trying to discover the truth about her missing grandmother. Her grandmother wrote this book of fairy tales based on this very mysterious place called the Hazelwood. And anything involving this book of fairy tales, there's only like a handful of copies left, ends in these bizarre and tragic consequences. So this book is highly visual, but it's also very hazy. There are gaps in our protagonist's memory, and despite having spent her entire childhood on the run, she can't remember a lot of concrete details about her life. And that really serves the story, because this book has 2 primary settings, the real world and the Hazelwood, where all of the fairy tales took place. Events in the real world seem trippy and hazy, while the characters seem vivid and defined. And the opposite is true when they're in the Hazelwood. And that's because throughout the story, we learn that one of the characters from the Hazelwood has left their story and entered the real world. So the setting here is an enchanted place, not only because it is a fairy tale, but because Albert has written it to both fade into a hazy dream at times and to come alive and grow around us like weeds in a flower bed. And she uses this as a plot device to show us that certain characters are out of place in these worlds. Brilliant. Now, the best characters have a backstory. They have a history. They have a past that has shaped these characters into exactly who they are today. So it stands to reason that the best settings would also have history. Lost Lake by Sarah Addison Allen is about a recently widowed woman and her young daughter who travel to Lost Lake, a beautiful summer oasis run by her great-aunt Ebby. There they meet and interact with a colorful cast of characters, including a local handyman and his connection to a friendly if mysterious alligator. And all of the characters at Lost Lake have their own beautiful interwoven history of some kind of personal tragedy. Lost Lake is obviously the setting for this story, but it's not the lake itself, but the community of people who come together every year and visit Ebby that makes the setting come alive. Lost Lake permeates with the energy, connection, and love that doesn't just go away because of personal tragedy. It's like Amber, preserving everything that was good and whole and precious about the love that was there. And it's how our main character Kate comes to terms with her loss and grief. Lost Lake is a beautiful book, and it's actually not very sad despite what it may sound like. It's funny and light and heartwarming, and that's a lot to do with the setting itself. Lost Lake. So we've just talked about a setting that has history and backstory, which are ways to develop a character. But what about a setting that goes through growth and change? You can find this in the Books of Elsewhere by Jacqueline West. The Books of Elsewhere is a middle-grade fantasy novel series about a girl named Olive who moves into a very creepy house with magical paintings. Throughout the series, we learn more about the house and its history of belonging to an erratic painter and his witch daughter. There are 5 huge talking cats, all with distinct personalities, and they live in the home too. And they also represent the home in a way. And their opinion of Olive changes throughout the book, and so the house itself responds to Olive differently through the series progression. As Olive learns about the paintings, which she can magically skidoo into like in Blue's Clues, the more she learns about the house and its history and its owners. And she learns about the magic system and the inner workings of the house itself. And as she learns, the house responds back to Olive and either allows her to discover more or actively thwarts her in her efforts. In this way, the house goes through growth and change as it adapts to Olive and her investigations. This is very much a character trait and a way that Jacqueline West has made her setting, the creepy house on Linden Street, a character. Star Daughter by Shveta Thakrar. This is a beautifully visual novel about South Asian and Hindu mythology, and most of the book actually takes place among the stars. See, this mythology deals with the constellations. The constellations are actually families and family groups. They hold power, they have their own politics, and they can take human form. So in this way, the characters of this book are the setting because they are the stars. It's just a really neat concept, and I can't wait to read more from her and more about Hindu mythology. This setting in Star Daughter is absolutely enchanting. Caraval by Stephanie Garber. Okay, so you all probably know, or you might know, that Caraval is one of my favorite books ever. Caraval is about a girl named Scarlett who has always dreamed of attending Caraval, this once-in-a-blue-moon mega festival circus game, and is run by this mastermind named Legend. But when her sister Tella is kidnapped, Scarlett must travel to Caraval to rescue her. There, she discovers the story is much bigger than she originally thought, with Tella at the center. Scarlett has to play the game in order to win and free her sister. So this enchanted place, Caraval, is the setting for this story. It's got dressmakers and hat shops and fortune tellers and other players in disguise, and the currency traded isn't in coins and coppers, but in your favorite memory or days of your life. So as Scarlett navigates these streets, tents, and other people, both other players and performers, she learns a lot about herself. And the way that the setting is both the driving force and the catalyst for these characters is how the setting becomes a character. It's certainly dynamic enough, more dynamic than most of the supporting characters, but it's also magical and therefore always changing. It literally causes events to happen, interacts with the characters, and forces our protagonist to grow and change with it. In this way, immersive and dynamic Caraval is an example of setting as character. These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. So if you've seen just about any of my videos this past year, you probably already know how I feel about these Violent Delights. Spoiler, loved it. This is a Romeo and Juliet retelling set in 1920s Shanghai. And the most captivating thing about this entire story is not the romance. That's not even like the main subplot. And it's not the mystery of this weird virus that makes people tear out their own throats. It's not the violence and the gore. It's not the war between these two rival dynastic street gangs. It is the character of Shanghai itself, which at this point in history was undergoing a major cultural shift as it was becoming more westernized. The source of tension in the entire book, the very nucleus of the tension, is in the identity of Shanghai itself. And every single character has taken a particular stance and investment in shaping that identity and then fighting for it. The fact that the setting has its own identity, has its own cultural distinctiveness with its own personality and core integrity, and the fact that the city itself is the source of tension for the story is what makes Shanghai in These Violent Delights an example of setting as character. The Alchemist by Paul Coelho. This is a modern classic about a boy who grows up and ponders his life while traveling in the desert. And it's really easy to read and understand because it's all written like a parable, the whole book. And the thing is, most of this book takes place in the desert. That's it, just this massive, expansive, endless desert. And it's in the desert where all of the ponderings and the spiritual and existential musings take place. The desert in this book is liminal space. It is a space of nowhere and in between. He is both corporeal and spiritual while he travels. He is both moving forward and standing still. He is finite and he is limitless. And if that sounds trippy to you, then you're right. But that's liminal space. He's in the doldrums and the in-between, and almost the entire book exists in that space. In most books, or in most literary books, I guess I'll say, there are moments when a character moves through liminal space, almost like a threshold. It's the quintessential labyrinth that a character has to navigate, overcome, and then reemerge anew on the other side, and it's used as a plot device to serve that purpose. But in this book, this boy is in this space almost always. He's always traveling, he's always nowhere, which tells us that the setting itself has more of a role to play in this story. This liminal space, the desert, the setting, is a character too. And finally, The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This book is about a magical circus that also pops up every once in a blue moon, and it's run by magicians. Specifically, it's about a duel between these two magicians. Going back dozens, maybe even hundreds of years, these two magicians got into an argument and they each said that their acolyte would be more powerful than the other, which sets this whole circus in motion where these two acolytes turned magicians compete to outdo each other within the circus. So this book overall is much more visual and complicated than, for example, Caraval. There's also the point that The Night Circus skews much more toward adult fantasy and Caraval skews much more toward YA fantasy. But it's also more complicated in story too. The magic and magic system is much more complex, and the circus itself is difficult to understand. The main point here is that understanding the setting is the key to understanding the plot. The Night Circus has its own rules of engagement. It has rules of engagement for the magicians, for the guests, for the other characters in the book, and for the reader. And it takes us the entirety of the book to understand those rules of engagement. So we truly can't understand the plot until we understand the setting. And it's when we finally get those missing pieces to the puzzle, solving how it all works together, that the story itself comes together as a whole. In this way, The Night Circus is yet another enchanted place, another setting as character. What are some of your favorite settings in a book? Are they enchanted or enchanting? Do they feel alive in some way? Let me know in the comments. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you loved it, hit subscribe. And of course, there's always Instagram. Take care, and as always, happy reading.